Hello, this is
Hey,
Sandeep Tyagi, and you are listening to The Brand Called You. The brand we are speaking with today is Phil Davis. Welcome to the podcast, Phil.
hey, thanks for having me, Sandeep. Yeah, good to be here.
Phil is a man who wears many hats. He has been an ordained minister. He was in the Air Force. He runs a band, has several CDs that he has produced, and he's an author and has just come out with his new book, which we'll be talking about. So there is a lot to cover.
Hmm.
And I want to actually get started right at the beginning. Tell us what was that brought you to become an minister and join the church, and what was that journey like?
Okay, well, I grew up on Long Island, New York, where I was basically a Methodist or a Lutheran, depending on which town I lived in at the time. And it was easy fruit Christianity, right? It was just there. When I went in the Air Force, though, I found myself in a very unfamiliar situation because in the basic training, their goal is to terrify you, right? And it was during the Vietnam War. It was 1968. I had just graduated. It was the height of the Vietnam War. The Tet Offensive had happened earlier in the year, and I'm going out into the world, and I could get killed, right? I was in the Air Force, so that was meant I wouldn't be on the front lines. And I planned it that way. Um, but I was sitting in a locker in my barracks during basic training. We had been given a little New Testament at the chaplain orientation. I had been confirmed in the church and I read a lot of the Bible, but I started reading Matthew, the first book of the New Testament. And I remember a verse that really captured me and it held and where Jesus just said, "Come unto me, all ye who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And so there was comfort in having a spiritual sense, during that time. And shortly after that, when I went on my duty station at Patrick Air Force Base in Cocoa Beach, I met a group of a Christian fellowship, that was interdenominational in the sense that some of the guys were Catholics, some of us were Protestant, and different Protestant, but we all had this, it was like our fraternity, So, so during that time, I really realized that I had a seeking soul, that I wasn't content to be what a lot of times we call in the church the C and E Christians, which are C is for Christmas and E is for Easter. The people that only go to
Okay,
church,
right, twice a year.
twice a
Yeah.
year. So I felt the sense that from a young age that God was real, that there was a presence within me and around me, and I wanted to connect with that. Um, so then, yeah, I got a degree, undergraduate degree, and then decided I felt like I wanted to go to seminary. I could decide if I wanted to, my whole life to be a professional
Right.
pastor or missionary. So that's how that came about. And
So there was no like big transformational event. It was more an evolution as you got exposed to the ideas, connected thought. You just automatically gravitated towards becoming a seeker and connecting with the church. It was not a reaction to maybe the war or what was happening in the world at that time.
no, no, it was, I have, and I talk about it in my book that I feel like, we construct our own theological framework. As much as we say that's the church, ultimately we decide, I'm going to go to this Methodist church and here's their statement of faith, or here I'm going to go to this Catholic church, or I'm going to go to the temple, the Hindu temple, or whatever. And you decide. It's like a consumer in a sense. Most of our religion really is kind of given to us. We don't choose it. I didn't choose to be a Methodist. My parents took me there, right? So, but at some point you got to go. Uh, is there a God behind all of these words, right? Here's this statement of truth. I believe this, and I believe this, and I believe this, and I go. But yeah, is it real? Is there really something there, or is it just something that you've constructed? So that was the path I was on since I was young.
Even before you went and decided that this would be your full-time profession, you were already on that path. You were kind of always seeking to find answer, is there God? And if so, what is the shape, form, things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah, interesting.
yeah.
So, how was the journey? And tell us a little bit about what was happening in the world of church, and what was it to be like a
Mhm.
minister in that time and age, where a lot of youth were lost. You know, we had the hippie age, we had economy, which was it was going through some shocks, but in general, it was doing very well.
Yeah,
You know, there was oil shock, but it was also the richest country by far the world had ever seen.
yeah.
And at the same time, the youth were lost. So, what was it being a minister, a pastor, guiding people
Hmm.
who may have been somewhat lost in
Yeah.
all extremes?
Well, what was cool about the United States that during that time, and we're talking about, 60s, 70s, 80s, is what I'm talking about, is that actually in 1968 and the early 70s, Jesus had kind of become cool because, there was Jesus Christ Superstar on Broadway, and all these rock stars were singing about Jesus, Jesus is just all right with me, and, Spirit in the Sky. Um, and the Beatles and the Beach Boys were going to India. They met with the Maharishi Yogi, right, in the 70s. So there was this sense of, yeah, there was this sense that beyond the church, which a lot of us, the church had become dead orthodoxy. It's the same old thing, and so here we are finding that Jesus is out there in the culture beyond just our church. So it was actually an exciting time for youth like myself. We even started a band, a folk Christian band in 1970 that I was in that toured around the Southeast for conferences. It was a part of why I'm doing music now, because I realized I could play guitar in a band and I could help the band do stuff. So
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 music has also been a lifelong journey for you.
yeah, music has always been a part of who I am. I had trouble growing up. I knew I would go into the arts, when I was a kid, and I was writing science fiction stories when I was 11. I was doing Marvel characters, pen and inks when I was 12, and I was interested in music. I got my guitar. The Beatles came when I was 14, and I got a guitar right away and started a band, right? So music has always been a part of my life, you know, and I find that that's part of the way God communicates with us too, and we communicate. So, songwriting. I was writing my first songs, not showing them to anybody when I was like 16 years old, and in chemistry class, I'm sitting back there writing song lyrics, not paying attention. So, um, I think it's just something that some people just are born with that, you know.
Yeah.
So,
So you become a pastor, and you are doing this full time. You're also into music. Now, the power of religion at different times has played a very important role in shaping the destiny of the country, even civilizations. How did you see the moment? And I know over time you have changed your view, and we'll talk about your book. But tell me the evolution. You know, what were the where did the fissure started to happen? What was the fracture point where
right,
you said, "Oh, maybe this part I do not connect with"? And at the same time, I would love for you to talk about what were the things to which you stood fast? What was foundational? Say, this part I get, but this part maybe not so much. So help
right,
us understand how
okay,
that landscape was shaping.
yeah. Well, I think if you're really seeking truth or seeking to go connect with the divine presence, whatever you call it, him, her, or they, right? Whatever the name of your gods are, that if you really want to connect with them, it has to become experiential at some point. And I find that a lot of American Christianity or Western Christianity is very scholarly. it's very word oriented, right? It's like,
Mhm.
okay, this is what it says. And um, so, but then I started read, and I knew that the church I was in was just a brand of Christianity. And I started when after you finally get into the things and you believe them, and then you start going, well, I've studied the ancient Greek and the ancient Hebrew now, and I've read all this stuff, and I go, this doesn't really hold up anymore. You got to
Mm.
be willing to challenge the authorities that say what your religious truth is, right? Because we find, this every century is so different. I mean, if you would talk to, if a if a if an evangelical Christian would talk to Martin Luther back in the 1600s from today, talked about the rapture, and Martin Luther wouldn't know what you're talking about. It's like
Mm.
an evangelical. I knew from my studies that evangelicalism had been a decision made by churches, and basically in the 1920s in the United States, when there was a movement to go anti everything,
Mm.
basically, right? Anti science, anti secularism, anti intellectualism, it gets to the point where, and this is where the dividing line for me came, is that it became anti-Jesus. It became anti-humanity. I think the
Mm.
biggest thing lacking and why I left is the way your soul is treated. You're told from birth that you are no good, that you are a
Mm.
sinner, that you don't have God. So you got to go get him, which is different from Hinduism, which is why I love the Eastern religions, because you got God to begin with. You don't have to go get him. What a what
It's
a
right inside you, everywhere.
what a paradigm shift that is. Because that is one of the biggest differences between Eastern religions and Western religions, and the West still doesn't get it. So, but there are traditions in our Christianity of mystics and people who don't believe all of these statements of faith. I mean, I literally will have people say, well, since you don't believe Jesus is the only way to heaven, are you still a Christian? And I go, yeah, I'm still a Christian. Why is that a litmus test? I mean, first of all, for any religion to be seriously considered for all people, you can't say it's only for these people, right? So for a religion to be true and to ring true for any century, it has to be, there has to be certain things that appeal to everybody, that are true, and here we are in the West. We are on this thing where we have been exiled by God, and how this plays out is that you have your theology. So somebody will have a statement of theology, but then the real thing is, how is that applied? What is the applied theology? And what I found was, if you take this, the way they applied a lot of their theology winds up being anti-human. You From the very beginning, and this is why I don't subscribe to the view anymore, is that I realized that evangelicalism um, sets you up in a war against yourself from day one. You are saddled with the old man, which is your sin nature, and so it's a religion of exile and a religion of war.
Mm.
Anyway, so
And um, but it is over years, the movement in some sense has become stronger and even a more powerful voice in the life of this country in US. Um, do you see some of those trends have become stronger? And why do you think so many people still hold on to it? What is it that they are getting? And why is it that what you saw is still relatively few people that realize that? You have any thoughts on that?
yeah, well, I think it's partly, but so much of our religion gets enmeshed in our culture, and in America, excuse me, and in America, I grew up in the North, the Northeast, where Methodism and Lutheranism wasn't like enmeshed with our everyday identity. in our culture. It's like, okay, there's my church. I believe these things. But there was a certain amount of separation there. But when I came down to the South, where I met Christ and, found, basically it was a Southern influence thing. And I'm not, I've read this in books, so I'm not making this up, but you can read some of these, you can hear about some of these on the internet where they're talking about how the religion in the South became much more enmeshed with their culture. So that church you're going to is your whole, it's much more a part of your identity. And I think that's what's happened in our country is that the Christian nationalists, and the funny thing is, I could have been one of them, because back in the 70s, if you look at the documentary, The Family, or I just watched one on the Scientology thing, those all started. There was a conscious decision in the 70s by people in the evangelical movement to let's go to the halls of power. Let's find celebrities. Let's find people that we can rope into, because they want to make this a Christian nation. But, that was never the idea. That was never the plan. They want to, it'll, if it's up to them, it'll be a Christian Taliban, So we have to we have to separate the church and state to the right. There's certain places where it meshes, in the ethical senses, but it has to be separated. In America, in some ways, maybe this is our first big religious war, because you look at Europe. Europe was ravaged by Christianity, right? All those centuries when they're fighting here and fighting there, the Catholics and against the Protestants and the Protestants against the Protestants. It's like, but Europe has like figured it out somehow, and they're more apt to be more atheist than Christian now, and so
Yeah.
that worries American Christians. They go, oh, look, we don't want to become like them. But it's like, but you're becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy
Yeah.
by pushing your agenda.
Those are strong words, Phil. I want to bring you back to um, what was it that sustained? Because there was something in the faith and something in what you learned that you carried with you, because you still obviously say you are a Christian. So tell
Right.
us more about the positive side as well. What is it that has stayed with you?
Well, I I really like my Christian cosmology. I mean, the stories from the Bible, the Jesus in the New Testament. Um, there's a lot of wisdom there, right? But then I actually found that, they talk, evangelicals we talk about the living Word of God, that we want the Bible to be alive, right? But I got to a point where it was no longer alive, because when you limit your interpretation to a literal or historic primarily only, you
Mhm.
suck the life out of some of these
Yeah.
old stories, right? So
Yeah.
so I always had this. So I took time to delve into Hinduism and to delve into Buddhism and to read about the Kabbalah and the Jewish something. Joseph Campbell made a really awesome comment when he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's basically this. He said, orthodoxy tends towards division, whereas mysticism unites. So
Mhm.
if you and I had a friend who was a missionary in Israel for a while, and he talked about the same thing, where it's like, you know, he could sit there and talk to some old Jewish guy on a mountaintop, and their theology was different, but their sense of God was the same. The
Mhm.
sense of hunger. So I wanted to find out experientially if God would meet me. So what was cool about my journey, and what I'm excited about my book, is that I basically challenged God when I left ministry. I said, look, I've been on this path for 24 years, and I'm not sure I know you. I'm not sure I've really experienced you. So I'm going to launch out, and um, I want to meet you in the midst of all of life, And what's cool is that I feel like God took that on as a challenge.
Mhm.
And if I equate it somehow, I equate it to independent study courses in college, where it's like you make up your course, with the instructor, right? That was the path I was on. I said, I've done all the institutional Christianity, for my whole life, for 42 years, I've done institutional Christianity. And I go, there's something missing here. There's more to this. And, the one that helped me a lot really was Walt Whitman, Walt Whitman's poetry. Leaves
Yeah.
of Grass has become my new common book of prayer, because Whitman consciously knew in the mid 1800s when he was writing Leaves of Grass, there was religious movements going on in America trying to do the same thing we're doing now.
Yeah.
And he knew about Hinduism, he knew about the Eastern religions, and people will say, Whitman is our Vedas,
Hmm. Hmm.
because in Whitman, it's not about the name of your God, because he has that's what I like about the religions that are more have more gods. Like Hinduism has more gods,
Yeah.
and they're all but the Upanishads say it's the one behind the many. There is a presence behind all, and those are just emanations of the same being.
That kind of philosophy helps in a diverse world because if you have many gods, then you don't have to unite behind one. Uh,
Exactly. That's
well,
what
tell
we
us
need to do.
about your book. I know you have it. If you'd like, hold it up. Tell us what
Okay.
his
Yeah.
name is, and
Yeah. All right.
yeah.
So it's called Leaving God for God, and it's one pastor's spiritual path beyond the church. And it says on the back, "Do you feel betrayed by your religion?" So there's a there's a lot of people that have left evangelicalism, like me. Some of my closest friends for the last 40 years, we've been on the same journey. We were in the movement together, and we left together. And
Who'd
it's
want you? Who, if you had your wish, would you want to read this book?
I would like to some of those people that are writing books like, well, Tim Alberta. I read his book, The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory. I've been listening to a lot of these books about what's happening in the religious world, right?
Mhm.
Tim Alberta's book is really good because he grew up in an evangelical church. So I've been thinking about sending it to him.
Mhm.
Russell Moore, who left the Southern Baptist Convention.
Mhm.
Russell, let's talk about this because maybe we're asking the wrong questions.
Mhm.
Because, like you said, for religion to be taken seriously by all people, it needs to appeal to all people, right?
Mhm.
And I'm a, that's so the reason I wrote my book as a memoir was because I didn't want to give people a program. We're programmed to death, Oh,
Mhm.
how can I do this? Because it's going to be different for everybody,
Mhm.
and so I feel like I went rogue, you know, and God, I believe in God now experientially more than I ever did theologically, because as you read more and as you do get closer to these spirits, these this presence that is all around us, as you get closer, you realize that it's kind of beyond words,
Mhm.
you know?
So the organized God has to be left behind to find the experiential God within you.
You said it
Mhm.
perfect. That's
Mhm.
exactly it.
Okay. I want to change gears a little bit. I
Hmm.
see a whole bunch of guitars right behind you. Tell us
Hmm.
about your musical journey. And
Okay, yeah,
music is has been part of spirituality in many, many traditions.
yeah.
Does the two things link? And if so, how? Tell us what kind of band you have. Where can people listen to your music?
Okay, yeah. Well, yeah, this is a studio we built, and we have been recording every Thursday night for 14 years now. Either we're
Mhm.
practicing or recording or writing or editing or whatever, but it's been a way for me to express my spiritual journey. One of the CDs that we did was called Dreaming West, and it takes the first three songs are kind of iconic in my spiritual journey. So it takes the motif of going west, and there's a spiritual. I believe in the soul's journey, and the soul's journey is connected to my music, and so. But I started writing songs at a young age, and I didn't do it for a long time. I wrote a song. I wrote some songs when I was a Christian that we performed at some concerts. I wrote a song for a mission video that was their theme song. But then I stopped for a number of years, and with all that stuff, you can only do so many things. But when I came back to it, I decided I wanted to start writing songs again, and they just kind of came, So, um, so yeah, there's a to understand Peyote Moon, you have to have a bit of a feeling for spirituality because
Yeah.
there's spirituality behind all of it. So
And you have a YouTube channel,
we do we have
or
a we do have a YouTube channel. We have a website, Peyote Moon Music, and I have YouTube open here. You can go on YouTube and hear any of our music. You
got it.
just so like one of the songs. Oh, it turned off. One of the songs I wrote early was about my journey. Uh, was just a prayer. It was called. It's
Mm,
one of the songs that's listened to the most on YouTube. It's called "Circling." Um, not, but it starts out with "Not really sure where we stand these days,"
mm,
because I had to get away from Jesus for a while, and that's in my
mm,
book. So,
mm,
um, so anyway, there's a lot of songs that are confessional.
mm,
I wrote one of the CDs we did, Odyssey. We did this CD during COVID, and I was literally out back by my pool going through the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey,
mhm,
and wondering how can you, because there's a passage there, you
mm,
know, um, the hero's journey is there. So I wrote songs inspired by the Odyssey, um, and it made it my Odyssey. But there's a song on here about my dad. My dad. I realized that a lot of the reason why I'm doing all the music and doing all the writing is that my dad died young,
mm,
and didn't I don't he left us lots of pictures, but I was 24 when he died, and I don't know all his stories. So my dad is a sort of like he was cut down before he had a chance to do a lot of stuff, and his dad I never knew.
mm,
My grandfather died when my dad was like 13. So in the Davis family, one of the early prayers I prayed was that I would be allowed to live long enough to know my grandkids,
mm.
because there's been two generations of Davises that never knew their grandfather. So so anyway, there's a song on here about my dad. There's a song on here about my mom. So yeah, and it's been a it's been a, in, we never knew we could write this many songs. We joke in a
So,
band.
if your grandfather and father were taken away prematurely, who would you say were the biggest influence in your life?
Um, Well, I would say actually Jesus, for
Mm,
one.
mm,
Okay, so uh, I was impressed with the character. The "Come unto me, all ye labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And that's the sense of Jesus, as a person that was very approachable. You know,
mhm,
so Jesus was big. Really, the rock stars in the '60s were a huge influence.
mm, mm.
We all wanted to be a rock star, but you can't do that as a living necessarily. Some of
Sure.
them could, but those were the early influences. And
Got it.
then poetry, the writers. I was really interested in science fiction, so I was the nerdy kid reading
Well,
books.
Walt Whitman, you have some very good taste in terms of picking up literature. So
Uh-huh.
that's yeah. Um, let's move right along. Let's try to get a better sense of your childhood. You
Okay.
mentioned
Uh-huh.
that you grew up in Northeast in Long Island. What was it like growing up as a kid and in suburbia of America at that time?
Yeah. Well, actually, if you watch the movie Stand By Me, the
Mhm,
movie about the three or four boys going down the railroad tracks to find some body, that's pretty much, or even E.T., with that
mhm,
neighborhood with their riding bikes and all. I
mhm,
lived in the suburbs, we could take a train into the city.
mhm.
Um, it was a wonderful time. I mean, I feel very fortunate. That's one of the things I talk about in my book, that I feel I was very fortunate. I had a really good dad and a really good mom. You know, no, I don't have any horror stories about them. They were only
Yeah,
good. So it was a really exciting time. I mean, I remember watching the first Bonanza episode, right? In black and white. And then my friend had a
sure.
color television, so I'm seeing it in
Yeah.
color. So it was a different world where, now music is so it's everywhere, right? If you ever want. Back then, there were shared moments.
Right.
Like for instance, everybody watched the Beatles that night,
Yeah.
and you had to have it wasn't all over the place like it is now. So there was more sense of shared moments together
Mhm.
like that in our community. So,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
um, yeah.
Growing up, what was your favorite food to eat?
Well, everybody will tell you I'm a pizza guy. On Long Island, every shopping center there was going to be a pizza place, and it wasn't going to be a chain. It was going to be some guy making it, right? So,
Yeah.
still, I still love pizza. So,
For vacation, what do you prefer? Beach or a busy city like Paris or a action-packed activity like Las Vegas?
um, I prefer. I have the beach here, so I'm at the beach a lot. So I
Mhm,
prefer going to some place that has some famous city like Paris, or you know one of the European places. Not that
mhm.
I've been that much, but but then I also like the nature. We don't have mountains here in Florida, so I love going out west to see the mountains. So
Mhm.
I'm very hard to pin down on what I like at any one time.
If you could have dinner with a any person no longer living, who would you want to have a conversation with over a meal?
It would definitely be Walt Whitman.
And what would you ask?
I would love to go through the poetry with him. Song of Myself, Song of the Open Road, Passage to India. I would just want to talk about. He was quite a celebrity of his day. I've been listening to a new biography about him, but he was a newspaper man in Brooklyn for many years before he published his poetry, and he had a larger than life kind of presence, and people knew they could always, hey, if you want to see Walt, he's down at that same tavern every night, or he's going to see the plays in Broadway. So he was a fascinating character. So yeah, Walt Whitman.
Great. Well, it's been fascinating. We've already run past our time here, Phil. Last question. In
Mhm.
your words, what is brand Phil Davis?
um Brand Phil Davis. Well, I would say I'm a mystic seeker. I am a poet, a singer, and if I lived in another time, I'd probably be the tribal shaman, right? So that's me, and we're
Very
doing
well
that,
put.
and we do that in our music, and we do that in our writing. So, and we're starting another series of little videos that are kind of to promote the book, but also just to stir interest in these topics. So,
Well, we will definitely put the link to your book and your channel in the bio. Wish you the very best with the book. There you have it, folks. Phil Davis, the mystic seeker who found God by leaving the organized God. Thank you so much for joining our podcast.
thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.